So thank you. My name is Benjamin Goodlett, and I am the psychologist for the Roya Kabuki program at Boston Children's Hospital. And I've been a part of the program, I think for maybe 3 or 4 years now. And so I really have two roles in our program. One is I serve as the clinic psychologist. And so I've been really excited that I've met 46 different families so far with Kabuki syndrome, and have had a variety of roles in terms of helping families navigate intervention services, school services, getting an idea of developmental level and what to expect in terms of next steps. I'm also deeply involved in our research initiative, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. Because as everybody else is developing ways of screening for Kabuki syndrome or developing new medications or investigational new drugs, at the end, the goal is to improve the lives of people with Kabuki syndrome. And in order to do that, we need to be able to measure what are the aspects of people's lives that are impacted and what might get better with treatment. So to that end, what I'm going to talk about today is a group level description of Kabuki syndrome. And I'm going to be focused a little bit more on what some of the difficulties are that people with Kabuki syndrome tend to experience. But I don't want to give the impression that I'm giving a complete description of somebody with Kabuki syndrome, because again, nobody with Kabuki syndrome is just deficits, nobody with or without. But that's merely the focus of what I'm going to talk about today. I don't have any disclosures for this talk. So one of the big questions that we have with Kabuki syndrome is just what to expect in terms of somebody's developmental level, or what areas of their development might be impacted by the Kabuki diagnosis. And one of the things that we definitely know is impacted is overall intellectual functioning. So that's the overall summary of somebody's ability to reason, to use and acquire knowledge, their memory, their ability to take in information, their ability to understand and use language. It's that overall summary. And we know that about 1 in 6 people with Kabuki syndrome have overall intellectual functioning within the average range. And that on average, the intellectual functioning is around the 3rd percentile. So again, I don't want to make it sound like I am describing the destiny for any individual person, but it is important to understand at a group level where children and adults might be functioning, so that when we try to understand their day-to-day experiences or what might change with intervention, that we choose tools that are at the right developmental level and that are tailored to people with Kabuki syndrome. I know I said that I would talk about mostly deficits, but I think one of the things I will point out is an area of relative strength. Time and again, when we've had studies with Kabuki syndrome, what we've found is that verbal comprehension relative to other domains of cognitive functioning is an area of strength. So verbal comprehension is the ability to gain knowledge. It's the ability to have verbal concept formation, verbal reasoning. And so the day-to-day language skills and the ability to understand language compared to other skills is strong for people impacted by Kabuki syndrome. The other thing that we know that's really shown itself is that visual spatial skills are an incredible area of difficulty. So visual spatial skills include the ability to organize visual information in a way that the brain can interpret it. It includes understanding part-whole relationships. It includes understanding the details of objects that somebody is looking at. And those are important skills for practical, everyday activities, including reading, writing, locating objects or toys, navigating 3-dimensional space. And already by knowing that this is an area of difficulty for people with Kabuki syndrome, we can come up with practical everyday recommendations for things to help them function at home, as well as function at school. So those sorts of things might include simplified handouts at school, larger format handouts, perhaps the use of a light board. Oftentimes children and adults with Kabuki syndrome might benefit from consultation at school from a teacher for the visually impaired. Also, pretty commonly, I recommend structured reading support, just because reading is such an important skill and relies so much on these visual spatial skills that I think that people with Kabuki syndrome need every help that they can get to learn that crucial skill. We also know that Kabuki syndrome doesn't just impact cognitive functioning, but also social and emotional functioning as well. So we think of adaptive skills as the things that are the everyday practical skills needed to function at home and in the community. And so we think of this again as an overall way of summarizing, or I think of this as the overall way of summarizing somebody's capacity to function independently. And so we know that that is something that is impacted by Kabuki syndrome at a level similar to overall cognitive functioning. We also know that children with Kabuki syndrome are at risk for increased anxiety. And this as well as give the caveat again that I'm talking about at a group level. And so this isn't to say that this is the experience of every child or every adult with Kabuki syndrome. And I generally talk about anxiety in the context of Kabuki syndrome as a general level of anxiety that then might be exhibited depending on that person's specific environment. So I'll say that within our clinic and for the families that I've met, often the way that anxiety might be exhibited could show up as a lot of anticipatory anxiety around schedules or upcoming events. And the behaviors that might demonstrate that anxiety are seeking reassurance over and over again, or asking about the schedule over and over again, even when it's something that's been discussed. One of the big questions that I think everybody has had in the research field has been, well, what about social skills or social ability? Or whenever we talk about questions of development, autism is always a question. And while some research has indicated that autism-like features are observed in Kabuki syndrome, as far as I know to date, there's not research indicating that children and adults with Kabuki syndrome are at any increased risk compared to their peers for a diagnosis of autism. In fact, I would say this is not research-based, but our anecdotal experience has been that children with Kabuki syndrome are actually quite social and quite friendly, very much the opposite of what we would think of typically in autism, but that sometimes they do struggle with understanding the boundaries of when should they be friendly and social with someone versus when is that person still not a familiar adult. So again, what I said in terms of my research agenda is trying to understand what do we need to do to be ready when the clinical trials come. So if you think of a bridge being built where one side is identification and figuring out the molecular biology of Kabuki syndrome, on the other side, we have to meet that basic science with an understanding of the day-to-day experience of people with Kabuki syndrome. And then we have to figure out a way of measuring that experience. And this is a little bit different from a clinical evaluation because it's not about understanding a holistic picture or the unique aspects of an individual, but instead identifying standardized, repeatable measures of a specific domain that not only can we measure it across individuals, but that we think might change within the time frame of a clinical trial. And so our goal over the course of months and years is to improve the lives of children and adults with Kabuki syndrome. But in the context of a clinical trial, we need something that can be measured quickly and repeatedly to see that as hopefully the underlying biology changes, can we measure a change in behavior? And that's where we really think so far that visual spatial skills and spatial memory are going to be an important part of understanding the impact of potential treatments on Kabuki syndrome. And so again, visual spatial skills are those things that you need to organize visual information, to identify objects. Spatial memory is remembering where objects are or how to locate objects. And I also think that understanding how the day-to-day behavior is impacted will be very important. So we don't see in our clinic problems with acting out, aggression, rule breaking any more than we do for other children. So that wouldn't make for a very good outcome measure. But what we do see is more of a tendency to experience anxiety. And so trying to think about what questions can we ask, or how can we measure anxiety in a way that is repeatable and sensitive to change in the time frame of a clinical trial. And so again, our goal is to, and our ongoing goal is to understand when the treatments are ready to go to trial, what can we say is important in terms of assessing change in the people that are affected by Kabuki syndrome. And I'm very excited. We've had a project ongoing for several years now. We have a new effort that I think is going to get started in the next year. And my experience has been that, well, for families, it might seem like things are moving slow, that in the research world, things are moving lightning fast. This is so much faster than what I have seen in other rare diseases. And so it's really an exciting area for me to be involved in now. And I'm really happy to be a part of the Roya Kabuki program.